Welcome back to Your Passion, Purpose, and Personal Brand. I'm your host, Lisa McGuire. And today is special. It is the fourth time I've welcomed my friend Jim Juling to the show. Though, if you've been here since 2022, you'll remember when we were just two professionals meeting for the first time, microphones between us. But something shifted in that first conversation. There was clarity, there was generosity, there was a way of naming truth that created this immediate connection. And since then, we've both coached leaders, compared notes on reinvention, and walked alongside each other's work. And at some point, the word colleague became friend. And that's why today feels different. It isn't an interview. It's a real conversation between two people who spend their lives inside the inner worlds of high-performing leaders and who keep seeing the same pattern emerge. It's what I call successfully stuck. It's when everything looks right on the outside, yet something inside is quietly asking for honesty. When nothing is wrong, but something isn't quite right, it's when the shift shows up before the meaning does. Jim sees it in corporate leaders, and I see it in founders and entrepreneurs. And today we're speaking to that shared human moment. So wherever you are, leading a team, running a business, or maybe even noticing a restlessness you can't quite name, this episode is for you. So let's get into it. Jim, welcome to the show. Welcome back. Number 4,
which we believe is a record, right? And it'll be a record that I'm very proud of, my friend. But, your introduction is emblematic of our whole relationship, except that you didn't say you have been a mentor to me in so many ways in the work that we're doing. And I hope I've been a good thought partner for you. But I couldn't be more excited about a message or a podcast partner than I am about this one today. So thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. I really feel like this is going to be a pivotal episode. I'm so glad we're having this conversation. Every time you and I talk, we end up naming something that so many people feel, but almost no one is willing to say out loud. So we just have that way of doing that. And that's exactly where I want to start today. But before we get into frameworks or insights, can we just begin with this one question? When you think about people you work with, and honestly, the season you're in yourself, right? What does that early feeling of successfully stuck actually look like?
Yeah, it's such a great place to begin. And Lisa, even when you asked the question, I felt it in my physical self as much as thought about it in my mind. That's how deep I think this topic goes. And I think the very first thing that happens is a sort of diminishing ROI. You're still doing the same things you've always done, but they're bringing you less joy. They're bringing you less fulfillment. You're starting to have what I like to call spiritual friction. I'm not a big fan of the phrase burnout. I think it's a little overused, and maybe we've even forgotten what it really means. But I kind of like this idea of the gears are still turning, but they're grinding a little bit. So even in my own experience as a CEO, I found myself at one point working harder to try to replace the fulfillment I used to get. And then when I didn't get it, guess what I did? I tried even harder, and it got even worse, to the point where I said to you once when we first met, I felt hollowed out from the inside. And yet from the outside, I'm sure most people thought I was quite successful. And I did have a great job with a great company, and I was working with great teammates. But it was no longer bringing me the joy and the fulfillment. So I'm always giving out, and I'm never replenishing back. And that, I think, you and I are talking about today is a condition a lot of people are experiencing.
Yes. And what I find so striking about what you said is that none of this looks like failure, right? These are people who are objectively doing well. Their lives work, their careers work, their businesses work, but internally something just isn't lining up anymore. So let me ask you this, because you've seen it across so many leaders. Why do you think this particular kind of misalignment stays private for so long?
Well, first of all, it's the scariest thing in life, Lisa, I think. And we clearly acknowledge I'm older than you, so maybe I feel this in a different way, is when you cross the line between success and significance, When you're early part of your life, it's all about success. And the tragedy of success is it's so measurable, it's so observable, it's so celebrated in all the world. Success sort of feeds on itself, and it drives you for a long time in your career. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's a beautiful time in our lives. But for everybody, I think there comes a moment when success is no longer enough. You want more from your life. You want to feel like you've made a difference, that you've made an impact. You begin to have this scary idea that there will come a day which will be your last day. And you will want to look back and say, am I happy with what I did with my life? And the moment those thoughts start to come in, I think the algebra changes, which is to say, I no longer am asking, am I succeeding? But I'm asking myself, do I matter? And that I got chills all over my arms when I said that to you. That's how true that is. I think that's the pivot point. And when you start asking yourself this different question is when you start hopefully finding a different answer, but you've also started an entirely new journey than the one that brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, that question, do I matter and do I still matter? And I think there's this quiet guilt, almost like I should be grateful. And so what do I do with this restlessness, right? And, Jim, I've seen it too, especially with founders. Everything they built was supposed to be this dream, right? And then suddenly they've built this and it doesn't feel like it fits anymore. And I've seen it so much, particularly over this last year. And that's really a good bridge to the next part where I want to go, because there's something very human that happens next. In our last conversation, we talked about how most people can clearly articulate what they want to get away from, right? But struggle to name what they're moving towards. So let me ask you this in a way that kind of gets underneath that pattern. What do you notice happens when someone knows what they want to escape, but has no clarity about what comes next?
Yeah, I think there are two things that, and by the way, I didn't realize so much today was going to be so biographical for me. Most of my answers are coming from my own journey, but of course, as well as the leaders that I've, which is always the case if you're on a conversation with Lisa McGuire. So I'd say the two things that happen first. First of all, you feel enormously guilty. I remember trying to confess to someone at one point that I was just not happy. I just didn't feel happy anymore. And they literally were unhappy with me for being unhappy. It's like, give me a break.
Crazy.
Yeah, like you have no right to complain about anything. And of course, that's not fair, but that's also a prison. That's like a cage, Then you don't want to share it with anybody else. So I think that's the first thing that happens. And then I think the second thing, tragically for high performers, which is kind of a specialty area for the two of us, high performers, when they get into this algebra of I should be happy, but I'm not, there's only one solution. I just need to work harder. And the first stage of everybody's realization, Lisa, I wish this wasn't true, but it was true for me. And I think for many people is I just double down. I'm just going to work harder, But I also think that if we're not careful, that effort-based performance becomes like an armor that nothing can penetrate. And then inside, our hearts are still aching. We still have these deep questions like, this doesn't feel right, and it's not as rewarding as it used to be. And there's something I'm supposed to be doing. I don't know what it is. We've got all that rumbling around, but it's inside the armor. And so outside, everything just looks incredible, but inside we're sort of trapped. I have a friend, if you don't mind this quick quote, I have a friend who likes to say, every tree outgrows its pot, but it doesn't hate the pot. It just needs new soil. I love this, don't you? What a beautiful organic metaphor. Every tree outgrows its pot, but the tree doesn't hate the pot. It just needs new soil. Well, that's perfectly appropriate for high performers who have reached the point where the ROI on their investment and their talent is no longer bringing them a return in joy and fulfillment. They've just outgrown the pot.
I love that. And I think, to go back to what you said, that we have learned, to just double down and work harder. But think about when you're coming up and growing up, you always hear the power of being successful is about working hard, right? And then the narrative that we hear from the marketplace of hustle and grind and just do it and, go beyond, above and beyond, all of those things that we hear. So we think, okay, well, this is what got me here. I just need to work harder to get there. And this whole idea is really universal because entrepreneurs do the same thing, right? They pivot quickly. Entrepreneurs are especially known for seeing something and, oh, there's a trend, I'm going to go chase it, or there's an opportunity, I'm going to go fix it. We change our offers, we change our direction, we start something new all of the time, and we have to, kind of hold back because we want to go fix things, right? And so we've got this idea of doing it. But it's still running, right? It's still running. It's running in a slightly more socially acceptable outfit of what it is. But let me connect this back to something that you said earlier. Why do you think the people who are normally the most decisive in business, right, become so hesitant when that decision is about themselves? Because they have no problems making a decision. But when it comes to them, they kind of hold back. Why do you think that is?
I think there are two things that always seem to come to mind, and not always in a pair, but somewhere along the journey, you hit both of these. And the first one we've sort of touched on. There's a kind of succeeder's guilt that you just carry, and so there's this, it's almost like a closet, like we should have a 12-step program or something I don't know how to say it, but it's almost like you're secretive about it. So I think we've touched on this, that's the first prison. But I think the second prison is, in my experience, leaders who reach this point have great clarity about everything they don't want in their current life. They're unbelievably, if you're coaching one of them, I've had people give me a list of 12 things that weren't right about their current life. Such clarity. It's awesome. And then when you say, well, great, now let's turn our attention to where do you want to go? And it's like a blank television screen. There's nothing on the screen. They don't know. They know clearly what to try to get away from. So in the old expression, they're running from, they have a lot of velocity to run from, a lot of energy, a lot of drive. I'm getting out of here. I'm doing something, And then when you say, okay, let's map it out. What are we going toward? They're fuzzy at best. I'm trying to be very kind in the way I say this because a lot of people are hurting as they hear you and me talk about this, But I think it's the lack of clarity that ultimately makes you afraid. I say this real fast to you. One of my favorite movies in the world is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And if you remember this scene in the movie, there's a point where Indiana Jones has to step out into what looks like a chasm in order to save his father. We won't replay the whole movie, but he's standing on the edge of a deep chasm, and the instructions he's given are he has to walk forward. But there's nothing there. You're going to fall thousands of feet, And then if you remember this movie as fondly as I do, perhaps I remember it too well, at least I don't know, is he steps out, and the moment he steps out, the bridge appears. The bridge was there all along, but it was designed so that you couldn't see it until you step out. Well, I think about this often with leaders who are in this spot of saying, we have to take a step, and where they want a whole plan, they want a map that goes 3 years into the future. They want this perceived security of knowing I have an executable strategy. But most of the time at this point in life, it doesn't work that way. It's a journey of discovery. And discovery takes courage and stepping. It's a little bit like playing chess. You move and then the universe moves, or you move and then life moves. It doesn't work the other way around. So I come to this second thing, I hope I'm not going too long on it, of just saying it's the courage to take a step into the unknown when so much of your life has been about the known. Your company, your people, your team, your brand, your product, your service, your history, your economics, you've got it all. And now you're being asked to step into a new place in a new way, and it can be really scary.
It can be scary. And you talking about that just made me reflect back to when I started my business. I knew what I had been doing, and that's where I
Mhm.
started. But then I knew there was something more. And so that running from, as you said, we get a lot of momentum, but running to, it's almost like you're directionless, right? Like you don't know what direction you are. But what would happen, and when I started my business, one thing I knew I needed to have was branding photos, right? So I found this phenomenal photographer and I called her up and I said, I'd like to schedule a shoot. And what are you going to use these for? What's her question? I said, I don't really know where I'm going. But Jim, what happened is once I did that, then the light on the next step appeared. And it is taking that action that created that momentum and direction I needed to go. And I must think having this big plan, because I was a big planner. I love planning. I love planning. I love the organization. I love kind of knowing what's going to happen. But I think the planning, if I had it all mapped out, would have kept me playing small.
Mhm.
But I think the planning of one step at a time and kind of knowing the general direction has taken me far beyond than whatever I thought would have been possible. But I think to go back to this question, we're not used to listening inwardly. We've only
That's right.
been trained to respond outwardly. And that's where the next layer shows up that we're going to talk about, which are the behaviors that mask this misalignment, right? Because we are really good at hiding things.
Yes.
You and I see the pattern from two different angles. When someone is drifting out of alignment, they often start, like you said, doing more, over functioning, right? Over
Mhm.
giving, caring more than that's necessary. You see it in corporate, I'm sure. I see it in entrepreneurs. But let me ask you this. When a leader starts over functioning,
Yeah.
what do you hear is really going on beneath that behavior?
Mhm. To give you the straightest answer I know, it's a kind of quiet desperation that
Mm,
says to your mind, if you slow down, this will all catch up with you. You have to outrun it, which is the opposite. I mean, honestly, in so much of these situations, what a leader needs most is to be still for a moment and to hear quieter voices and to give deeper thought. I've lived this, Lisa. I know that there's an urgency inside you that says, let's do it. And so sometimes I encounter leaders who have transferred that energy into setting goals that no one could ever achieve, into expecting performance that no one should be held to. Even the leader themselves is not
mhm,
demonstrating that performance. And I think, kind of worst of all, leaders who get in this is it's almost a cult like mentality. Is you have
mm,
to say you believe, you have to be part of the team, you have to say we're going to
mhm.
do this. Even though we can't do it, and after the meeting is over, everybody goes in the break room and says, "We're never going to do this." And everybody says, "I know," but then why did you say that in the room? Well, because we're supposed to say. If you're in this trap, it's like a cult, the
Yeah.
cult of we will do anything at any cost. We're going to do it, and that's all because I think in my mind I have an image of the leader frantically running, being chased
Mhm.
by the monster of
Yeah.
you may not be as good as you think you are, or what you're doing may no longer be working, or perhaps you are no longer the best leader for this team and it's catching
Mm,
up with you, or times have changed. The way you were taught to lead is no longer the best way. In fact, it's a terrible way now. All that is like a monster chasing you, and you're just trying to outrun it. That's where that overperformance comes in, and then of course everybody suffers when that happens. And ultimately, 5 miles down the road, the bridge is out anyway. You can drive your car as fast as you want, but the bridge is out. You might as well accept that and then pause and do something different.
yeah, and I think this urgency to do, like, it's exhausting, the performance, the proving, right? Proving my worth. And it's something
Mhm.
that I also see with business owners. And where I see this is very much in how they serve their clients, right? It's almost like a self protection. The belief is if I over deliver, nobody's going to
Mhm.
question me, right? If I
Mhm.
over deliver, people are going to refer me because I gave so much. I'm
Mhm.
indispensable. And if I do that, then I'm not really facing the real issue, right? So it's a bit manipulative, very familiar. So here's a natural segue we're going to go into. When someone is relying on these patterns to hold it all together, all right? We're trying to hold everything together, grasp, again, desperation. What starts to break down first, Jim?
What a beautiful question, and as you were describing it, I was sort of remembering where I was in this exact place. I remember it vividly. And the way I thought about it at the time was that I would, if I could make my external better, my internal would right itself. And it's not true. I think identity always precedes performance. In other words, we can't outperform who we truly are. So if we're running from that, if we're trying to outperform this thing which is really our own sense of inadequacy, we're never going to get to the place where we actually are adequate and our own brilliance can shine through. And it sounds strange to say it, but I think for anybody listening to you and me today who is running away from the fear that they may not be enough, or the old way may not be working, or they may have to reinvent themselves, if you're running away from that, I promise the best thing you can do is stop and be still and let it come to you. And in that moment, most people that I work with can find their way out and find their way to the new thing. And that's where you and I coach people all the time that reinvent themselves and come back 3 months later and say, you rescued me. This was the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm a different person now. But you never get there until you stop running so hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think the idea of keeping it going, keeping that momentum, that is a great opportunity for emotional leakage, right? Quiet resentment, internal fatigue. But this thought of stopping is so counterintuitive. Again, like we're told, just do it and, hustle and grind and keep moving, and competition, right? If I stop, my competitor might get ahead of me, or my colleague might get glory for something that they did, and I'm over here being seen as being ineffective or non-productive. This is why I always have loved the end of the year, when it's almost like there is this unspoken rule that we're all going to take a pause, right? You may not see us on LinkedIn as much. You may not be as responsive to answering email. And so when we all had that permission, you don't have to keep looking over your shoulder or side to side. It's like, okay, I have permission maybe to be human for a bit, right? To have all of that. So it's just this slow, steady erosion if we don't. But I really hope people listen to what you had to say there, Jim, about taking a pause, because the other thing about it is when you take a pause, it might get quiet enough to hear this inner voice that we often don't listen to, or we can even hear, right? Yeah.
Which may always turn out to be the wisest voice we have, but it is quiet. My own experience of guidance in whatever form it arrives to me is that it's seldom loud. It's never shouting. It's never urgent. But I have to listen for it in order to hear it. And Alicia, you make me think of this in the Native American tradition. The children of the tribe were always taught that if you're ever lost in the woods, don't run. If you're ever lost in the woods, stand still. And the Native American teaching was, because the trees are not lost. The birds are not lost. Everything around you knows exactly where it is. Does it make you a little emotional? It's a powerful statement. You're the only thing. So it says, if you will be still, the forest will find you. Now, that's a 2,000-year-old tradition, but I think that's as appropriate for today as anything we have to say. Is there are a lot of people who are lost and in a frenzy to escape the feeling of being lost, when with great love and kindness, I say the thing they need most in all the world is to let the feeling of being lost catch up with them for a moment so that it can help them know where to go next and be found.
Mm-hmm.
I really think that's true. And I think the harder we run and the faster we run, the more we often move away from the very thing we need the most.
And, Jim, this idea of being lost, but, the trees and the birds, that's just so beautiful. But when I think about that too, I think about where we are in the world right now. It is very easy, if you take a look anywhere around you, to see that what used to be is no longer sounding the same. It's no longer looking the same. People are not operating the same. And so when that guaranteed of, okay, this is how you do it, suddenly shifts, then, what do we do in the past when we're confused? We might go talk to a mentor. We might read a book. We might listen to a podcast. We might take a course. All kinds of things that we could do. Read a case study. All kinds of things we could do to tell us and give us direction on what to do. But I think what is so beautiful about this time is the fact that we have reached a point in humanity where all of this pressure that we've put on people, whether it's outgrowing a role or outgrowing a business or a direction, it doesn't mean you failed. It means your identity is evolving faster than the structure around you. So I'm going to ask you this directly. How do you help a leader understand what they're feeling is an identity shift and maybe not a crisis?
Mm-hmm. And not even really a performance challenge, but as you said, an identity shift. So, Lisa, my way of coaching has so much to do with asking questions, and I know your way is that way as well. It was one of the many things that we share. But I like to say, I like questions that force you to go deep to answer them. So, for example, I would often ask one of my clients, what part of you is succeeding at the cost of everything else that matters to you? It's a great question. What part of you is succeeding at the cost of everything else that matters to you? And remember, I coach mostly senior executives. So I encounter people when the whole success formula has let them down. And then sometimes they find they've traded everything for a promise that was unfulfilled, that success would solve everything. So we have repair work to do, put a life back together or put relationships. So what in your life is succeeding? And then one of my favorites, but it has to be taken in the spirit in which I offer it. I hope it comes across that way now, is I say, what are you pretending that you don't know? Mm-hmm. What are you pretending you don't know?
Wow, that's a big
question.
You really
do know. Yeah. I hope people that know you and me will know this, but we use these questions in a very sacred way, and they're in a very safe space, and they're sometimes it's the only place an executive can let the armor down and be vulnerable for a minute and entertain questions like this. You can't really do it in an office setting even. But that question goes right to the heart of that. And then I have one last one that I've asked many times, and I say, what level of commitment are you living at now that would change if it just went one level deeper? What would change in your life if you could just find one level deeper commitment? So that's touching on, why are you doing what you're doing? And for most people, they end up, nobody ever says, I would work longer hours. Nobody ever says, I would drive my people harder. Those are not the real answers, right? Mm-hmm. And yet those are answers the world offers us all the time. Just buckle down, grind it out, get some more done, But these kinds of questions can only be answered, I think, from the inside out, not from the outside in. Our outsides are just fine. We've all got great jobs and great salaries and all those things. But from the inside out, we have to look, and then things don't look the same. And we have deeper questions to be able to. I know you won't mind if I say this. It's one of the ways that I ended up with one of the phrases I use a lot. I've used it with you in our conversations many times, which is to say, joy is a valid compass. We guide our lives by everything you could imagine except joy. We use title, promotion, increase, compensation, visibility, fame. We navigate toward all these things. And the one that would help us the most, we seldom consult, which is to say, will this choice lead me to greater joy? And so that I leave as a final question, but probably the one I like the best.
Yeah, that's a beautiful that compass idea, that's a beautiful idea to follow. And Jim, I want to call something out about those questions you just shared with us. Those questions are questions that you could have in a journal exercise, right? But there's something about sitting across from someone, whether it's virtual or whether it's in real life, to have someone who is asking you that question, not out of any bit of judgment, but as a way to hold a space for you to have the room to breathe and think about what that really is. And I think a lot of people, when they think about starting to understand who they are, I even had a conversation with someone yesterday and they said, well, that's a scary thing. And it made me wonder, why is it so scary? And I think part of it is we're directionless when we do it on our own. But having someone to walk alongside of us as a guide or a mentor to be able to ask those questions, to know that when you don't have an answer, or if you have an answer that needs more clarification, that person is a person that you can trust to do that. So this whole idea of identity shift, it's, while it is you, it is revealed so much in a richer way when you do have someone to walk with you. Have you found that?
Oh, very much. But I mean, first of all, I'm just basking in how beautifully you asked that question. I was taking all that in, and I agree with you completely. And I say back, that as throughout all of humanity, the greatest confirmation of a truth has been the presence of a witness. You think about there were probably cave people trying to decide who was right and who was wrong, and the whole decision would rest on the testimony of a witness, and that carries through all the way to this day. Well, when I think about my coaching and the intimacy and the sacredness of that room or that screen where we're having a conversation no one else is a part of, I feel that the great value I'm bringing is that I stand as a witness to your own discovery of your own life. But because it was witnessed, it's real. It's not something you just thought and then you could go through the rest of your day and not remember all of it or let it fade away. The presence of a witness confirms that it's a truth. And I may be stretching it a bit, but I think this is a good thought. The power of a witness makes you accountable to yourself for the revelation you just had. You can't pretend you didn't have it because there was a witness to it, right? And then so many people who go on a wonderful trip alone end up saying, I wish you were here. The absence of a witness we feel when we don't have it. The same thing applies in reverse. When we do, we have a witness to our journey. We have a witness to our struggle. We have a witness to our courage and our fear. We somehow begin to feel seen, and being seen is makes us more substantive with where we are. I can't explain how it works, but I know that it does work in that way.
Well, and I think sometimes we might have a tendency to say, did that just happen? Right? To have somebody there with you to see it and acknowledge it. And okay, I'm not crazy. It really did happen. But that leads us to this next part, which I think is really a very important part of our conversation today. People feel the misalignment, right? They sense the shift. They're anxious for clarity. But the question I see them resist the most is this one. Can I allow myself to tell the truth without rushing to action? So, Jim, from your vantage point, why is the pause, that space before the leap, so uncomfortable for high-performing people?
Mhm. And every part of me wants to say, because the only thing left in the room in that moment is you and the truth. There's nowhere
Mm.
else to go. There's no distraction. And so there's something you and I both love and value deeply, which is the teaching of Viktor Frankl, who helped us all with this idea between stimulus and response, there's always a space. But the better part of that is that in that space, we choose who we are or will become. So it's not the fact that there is a space that's so pivotal. It's that we have the ability to choose in that space. So when a person has been running, let's go back to our familiar frame, and they find the courage to pause. And maybe they find the courage to
Mhm.
pause because they booked a coaching session with you or me, and the pause is built into the space we create for them when
Mhm.
they arrive. Doesn't matter how we get there. We find ourselves in the pause. You're still going to sit on the other side of that Zoom screen, and everything in you wants to do something, to act,
Mhm.
to persevere, to strategize, to formulate, to conceptualize. And all of those are simply versions of avoidance. Those are ways of distracting yourself from the truth that's present in the room. So if we would capture that pause between stimulus and response and say, what is this here to teach me? And if we're in the presence, let's hope, of someone who can hold that sacred space honorably for you, with all the confidentiality and support that it should bring, and even say, well, what would that mean, or how would you do that, or what would we think next, or why would you feel that way? We can ask the question rather than give a solution. Then something miraculous can happen. I've said many times, Lisa, that if you're ever with a coach who says, here's exactly what I would do, you should run. You should run fast
Yeah.
away from that person, because they're not coaching, they're scripting, right? And probably
Mhm.
trying to just live out something that they have been unable to do for themselves. But the person who has got your highest good as their motive is going to never tell you what to do, but use every tool at their disposal, whether it's a story or a question or a way of thinking or an exercise, to get you to find your own answer. And once you have that answer, now you're on the other side of the pause and you're ready to go and act. But you have to fight
Yeah.
that temptation until you've done something with the pause between the stimulus and the response.
It makes me think of the time when someone asks a question and there's people who cannot tolerate silence, right? They have to say
Mm.
something, or maybe they're so nervous they have to keep talking. But I think, we're just built for movement. But this season really does require discernment, not decisiveness. And I'd love to tie this back to
Mhm.
something you said a few weeks ago when we were talking, because it was such a powerful line. You said, most people can make decisions for entire companies, but they struggle to make decisions for themselves. So let me ask you this as our bridge to our close today. What does
Mm.
support actually look like for someone in this middle space?
Mm. And I want, everything in me wants to immediately say the biggest thing is the space you're in this moment is safe to be however you are, wherever you are, emotionally, psychologically, professionally, achievement wise. It's all okay. That's, you have a place where you can stop for a moment without feeling vulnerable, without feeling that somehow
Mhm.
life will attack you because you've stopped. And I do think you're right about, there's something miraculous about the December to January time. Something happens in our psyche that probably goes back eons. But we do pause. We do have our own ways of
Mhm.
pausing, and we do reflect. And even the practice of making resolutions, as much as that's held up to scorn these days, is still probably a very healthy thing in some cases to say, if I want to bring a different version of myself next year, what would I do? You remember, I had so many years working for Dr. Covey, and one of the things that he always said was,
Mhm.
every organization is perfectly designed to produce the results they are currently getting, which is a powerfully convicting statement. But by extension, I say that with everybody I coach. Every human being I coach is living a life that is perfectly designed to produce exactly what they're getting now. So we have to accept that and then say, in the pause, how would I change? And we can't change all at once, and we can't, there is no lose 40 pounds in 3 minutes kind of solution that we're gonna take advantage of. We've got to do it step by step by step. But we can, in the pause, decide to take that first step. And Lisa, I think you do something very similar to what I do. No matter what we talk about in a coaching session, let's leave with one thing we're going to do. I want the power of inertia to propel my client forward when they click off the Zoom screen. So what is one small thing that would reverse the inertia of resisting and shift it to the inertia of progression? What would that be? And we try to find what that one thing is.
Yeah, I think the idea of having the space and the safety in this container that we have, where nothing has to be solved immediately, but yet you need to at least be pointing a direction of something to try, right? Something to try, because, you may go that direction and you may try something between one session to the next and come back and say, that didn't feel right, or it didn't work for me, or I'm really surprised. Like, I never thought this could happen. So it gives us some momentum as we go through, but that idea of allowing people to discover it within themselves, that's really the heartbeat of this entire episode. So before we wrap, I want to really speak directly to the person listening who recognizes themselves in this conversation, whether it's corporate, whether it's entrepreneur, founder. We're all in somewhere along that line. And maybe if we're not, we are planning to be. So if you feel slightly off as a listener here, if you feel successful but unsettled, if you've been carrying more than anyone realizes, and we know there's a lot to carry right now, there is nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong. You're not behind. You're not unclear. You're not failing. You're just standing at this moment before your next chapter takes shape. So, Jim, I want to ask you one final question, one I hope the listener holds on to long after this episode is over. So when someone is in this quietly honest season, what's the one question you want them to ask themselves? And I'm listening for myself too.
Well, there is a portion of this answer that is linear with wherever they happen to find themselves at that moment. There could be variations for this, but fundamentally, I think, is in your quietest moment, what calls you forward? What is out there? You're afraid to listen to it, but when you do, it pulls you forward. I have many people, for example, corporate executives, who will say, I enjoy my job. I certainly enjoy the compensation. I like all the things that come with it. But, if I could do anything in the world, I would be a baker. Yeah. Well, you don't have to upend your life and go be a baker full time, but there are ways to capture that and infuse joy back into your life, even with what you're doing. So I'm trying in my somewhat circular way to say, anybody listening to you and me, don't run and jump off of a cliff to say, I'm going to change my life. Nor should you withdraw from life when you hear a message like this. Stand in the space, be able to hear the quieter voice that would say, here's something I would love to do. Here's something I feel I might be called to do. Here's something I was equipped to do, but I've not taken advantage of it. And what would it look like if I took one step toward that today? I really believe with all my heart, Lisa, that everybody's life has a through line. And the problem with a through line is you can't see it by looking forward. You can only see it by looking backward. But when you do look backward, you can see that there were clues all along the way to something that, if in your life, would bring you joy. Perhaps it wouldn't have been your whole profession. Perhaps you wouldn't turn your life upside down. Perhaps you wouldn't trade, but you would bring it in instead of leaving it out. Sometimes that's the only answer a person needs in order to change. Now, some people need more, and some people need dramatic change at a greater level than that. But to begin to ask that question is where all the power is. And you have to be still enough to hear the answer.
And I believe now more than ever is a great time to ask that question. There is no accident that we're having this conversation here today, Jim. You know, after 4 episodes now, as we started on our conversations and where this has led us, there is such an alignment of what we're seeing with both audiences that we serve. So I just want to thank you for being here with me today on this, what I think is really a pivotal episode for people to put words to what they're feeling of this being successfully stuck. And thank you for trusting this conversation enough to tell the truth that I believe so many people are ready to hear now. So thank you.
Well, it's a great honor, my friend, to be with you a few times. I've said many times that no one prepares like you do. No one asks questions of the depth of what you do, and no one listens as intently to the answers as you do. You're a remarkable presence on a format like this, or perhaps any format, and it's my privilege to be with you today. So thank you.
All right. And who knows, there may be another one in the works. We'll just see. We'll just see. So for the audience today, if today's conversation hit a little closer than expected, pay attention to that. High performers don't get stuck because they're confused. They get stuck because they've outgrown a direction that once made sense. But you don't have to overhaul your life, like Jim said, and you don't need immediate answers. I hope you heard that loud. You do need a space where you can think clearly and make decisions that match who you are now. And if you're ready for that level of support, the details are in the show notes on how to contact Jim or how to contact myself. So thank you so much for listening. You are not alone. There is nothing wrong with you. The idea is stay clear, stay honest, and move when it's time. You're going to feel when it's right. We'll see you here next week.